In the last section, we installed the HD Wallet Provider module at the terminal, and we're now ready to refactor our deployment script. In particular, we need to update the fact that previously we were doing compilation on the fly. So now rather than importing interface and bytecode from compile, we're going to require in our campaign factory JSON build. Remember that we are not deploying our campaign right now. We are only deploying our campaign factory. At some point in time, we'll use the campaign factory to create a new instance of a campaign. But as far as our deployment script is concerned, we are only ever going to be deploying the factory. So I'm going to find where we were previously requiring in the compile module, and instead, we are going to require in the compiled factory JSON. So I'll say const compiled factory is going to be require build campaign factory.json, like so. So we're saying go into that build directory and find that JSON file, and then assign all that JSON to compiled factory. Now in the rest of the file, we shouldn't have to change too much. So the provider should probably stay the same. We don't have to update anything around Web3. All we have to do is make sure that we update the contract creation process right down here. So previously we were trying to parse interface because we were pulling in the the raw JSON from the compiler. This time around, we still have to do the JSON parsing, but instead we are going to be parsing the compiled factory's interface property. So in other words, we're going to update this to json.parse, and then we will say inside of JSON parse, compiled factory.interface, like so. Now when I save this file, I'm going to see all my code jump as my code formatter is going to try to make this a little bit prettier. So I'm going to save this, and okay, looks like that's what I end up with. So again, we want json.parse compiled factory.interface. Now, if you left your code in kind of a messy state like me, you might still have a console log of the interface down here at the bottom. Let's be sure to clean up that console log statement because interface is no longer defined inside of this file. So I'm going to clean up that console log. All right, so I think we're now ready to try out the deployment. Now, when we do this deployment, we're going to get back an address that we very, very, very much want to keep around because we're going to eventually use this deployed version in the actual version of our app. Of course, it's totally fine if you end up losing that address and want to redeploy this thing in the future. But for right now, hey, try to limit the amount of ether you spend, right? So basically, we just want to keep a hold on the address when we run this deployment script. So let's now do the deployment, and we're going to copy down the address that we get. I'm going to go back over to the terminal. I'm going to make sure that I change into my Ethereum directory. And then I will run my deployment script with node deploy.js. Remember, this entire deployment process, oops, looks like we've got an error here. So I think that we left bytecode in here somewhere. All right, that's my mistake. So right here, when we created the contract, we updated the interface, but we did not take care of the same thing for accessing the bytecode. So we can update this as well. We're going to say compiled factory.bytecode, like so. All right, so now let's try deployment one more time. So I'll say node deploy.js. And just as before, we're going to have to wait about 30 seconds or so for the deployment. So I get the attempting to deploy from account blah, blah, blah. And we're going to wait some amount of time to actually see the success message come up. And hopefully at that point, we should see the address of the newly created contract appear here as well. So again, I can't say it enough. You and I are only ever going to be concerned with doing deployment of the compiled factory, or of the campaign factory, really, because we only care about making sure that our users have the ability to create new instances of a campaign through this factory. Now you might be thinking, do we need the compiled campaign at all if we don't actually care about that thing? Well, remember, eventually once people start creating instances of campaigns, you and I will want to use Web3 inside of our web application to interact with those deployed instances of a campaign. And so yes, we do actually need this JSON file right here because eventually we're going to need the ABI out of it so that we can work with those instances that have been deployed. So yes, we do care about both the built JSON files inside of here. All right, let's go back over to our terminal, and it looks like the deployment was successful. So here's the address of my newly created campaign factory. Now again, this is really important to keep this address around for right now. At the end of the day, it's not a big deal if you lose it because you can always just do the deployment again, but I'm not going to explicitly show the deployment again in this course. We are going to redeploy at some point, but that's going to be to fix a little issue. So I'm going to copy this address right here, and I'm going to make a new file inside of my root project directory. And I'm going to call this thing address, like so. And I'm going to paste the address in there. Now this is definitely not something we usually do on production projects. This is just for the purposes of this course. I just want to make sure you have this address handy for when we need it in the future. So once we actually put this into a reasonable spot, we're definitely going to delete this file. Again, not a standard file to have in an Ethereum project at all, just for the purposes of this course. All right, so I think our deployment has gone fantastically. So let's continue in the next section, and we're going to start thinking about the web application that we're going to build.